The white tablecloths, crystal chandeliers, and floral arrangements of scarlet and cream roses set the stage for the fairy tale Lily Williams had dreamed about for years. Yet, when the moment finally arrived, the reality far exceeded her expectations. This was meant to be the beginning of a new chapter in her life, the one she had envisioned since the first day she met Ethan Mitchell at the town library 2 years ago. The couple, Ethan and Lily, spun gracefully in the spotlight, their first dance as husband and wife. Guests were captivated by the scene, their phones raised to capture the moment forever. Many of those in attendance couldn't help but marvel at how the couple seemed out of place in the storied town of Prim Oak Ridge. There she was, a simple librarian from humble beginnings, and he was the heir to the Mitchell construction empire, a symbol of wealth and tradition, the unspoken royalty of the county. Lily shone in a cream satin dress adorned with fine lace. Her blonde hair was elegantly arranged, with fresh flowers woven into the delicate waves. Her greenish-brown eyes sparkled with happiness as she looked up at Ethan. He, a tall man with dark brown hair and a classic black tuxedo, kept his gaze fixed on her, almost as though he couldn't believe this was real. "She's a real beauty," one of Ethan's aunts whispered to a neighbor, though her tone carried an undercurrent of judgment. "Though, the nose is a little big, don't you think? And the shoulders, pretty broad for a girl." "Well, as long as she has healthy children," came the reply, a meaningful nod following the words. "David needs grandchildren, especially after that Emily thing." At the head table sat the groom's father, David Mitchell, the patriarch of the family. His large face, marked by a prominent chin, usually exuded confidence and authority, but now it was stone-faced, carved with an emotionless expression. His slicked-back, gray hair and expensive suit couldn't hide the physical strength that still remained despite his 61 years. He raised his crystal champagne glass mechanically, the glint of the fine drink contrasting with his stoic demeanor. Emily, his wife, elegant in a lavender dress, whispered something to him, her eyes tired but piercing. As the melody of the waltz reached its peak, Ethan kissed Lily tenderly, drawing applause from the guests. It was the perfect moment, a world filled with music, flowers, and joy. But then, the quiet hum of David Mitchell's phone vibrating in his jacket pocket shattered the illusion. He glanced at the screen, and his face froze, his eyes widening as if seeing something no one else could. 3 agonizing seconds stretched into eternity. Slowly, he rose from his seat, his gaze still fixed on the dancing couple. With a fluid motion, his hand slid under his jacket, revealing a black pistol, compact and deadly. The gunshot was almost imperceptible, like the pop of a champagne cork. But everyone in the room knew immediately that it wasn't part of the celebration. Lily's body stiffened in Ethan's arms, her eyes wide with a mix of surprise and pain. A scarlet stain began to seep through her cream satin dress, transforming the fairy tale moment into a nightmare. Ethan didn't realize what was happening at first. He continued to hold her, her knees buckling beneath her as her head fell back. His arms, which had once held her so lovingly, now struggled to keep her upright, his skin growing clammy with blood. "Lily," his voice cracked, confused and desperate like a little boy. "Lily, look at me." The screams of the guests merged into a cacophony of terror. Some rushed to call the police. Others tried in vain to administer first aid. But nothing could save her. The bullet had struck Lily's heart, ending her life just 23 minutes after she had said, "I do." David Mitchell stood frozen, his hand still gripping the gun, pointed at his son's wife. His face revealed no remorse, no anger, just the cold, unwavering determination of a man who believed the task was necessary. "Dad!" Ethan screamed, his voice filled with shock and disbelief. He lifted his tear-filled eyes from Lily's lifeless body and turned them toward his father. "What have you done? What have you done?" David slowly lowered the gun, almost as if it had only just occurred to him that he was still holding it. He didn't respond to his son. Instead, he simply returned to his seat at the table, placing the gun in front of him. The police arrived 7 minutes after the call, filling the Magnolia restaurant with flashing blue lights and sharp, authoritative commands. By then, David sat motionless, waiting for them. He didn't resist arrest, silently allowing himself to be handcuffed and led out of the room. His face remained impassive, though something that resembled sadness briefly flashed in his eyes as he passed his son. Ethan, still clutching Lily's lifeless body, refused to believe what was happening. His pristine white shirt and tuxedo were soaked in his bride's blood, and a look of complete shock remained frozen on his face. He didn't cry. The tears would come later. For now, his mind refused to accept the reality of the situation. "I'm Detective Alexa Morgan." A woman in a sharp anthracite-colored suit introduced herself, entering 30 minutes after the patrol officers. Her short brown hair was neatly tucked behind her ears, and her brown eyes, hidden behind thin-rimmed glasses, carefully scanned the crime scene. The chaos began to take shape under her direction. Forensic specialists worked the body, photographed the scene, and gathered evidence. Meanwhile, the guests, still dressed in their festive attire, waited their turn to give statements. Police tape cordoned off the area, transforming what was meant to be a joyful wedding party into a scene of tragedy. "We all saw it happen," Jeremy Fox, a tall blond man with red eyes, said in a shaky voice. David just stood up and fired a shot. No warning, no yelling, not a word. It was like an execution. Morgan nodded, taking notes in her notebook. "Did you notice anything unusual before the gunshot? Any detail could be important." Jeremy looked at his phone, recalling something. One of the bridesmaids, a young woman in a pastel pink dress. His face suddenly shifted, as if a realization had hit him. It was like he made a decision. You know, that look people get when they've crossed some internal line. He and Lily hadn't clashed before. Morgan shifted her gaze from her notebook to Jeremy. "Perhaps there were tense moments you noticed?" "No, not at all," the maid of honor replied, wringing her hands. David has always been very polite to her. Cold, maybe, but no more than with anyone else. He's just an unapproachable man. "How did Ethan feel about his father?" Morgan asked, keeping her tone gentle. "He idolized him," Jeremy answered quietly. "Always tried to live up to his expectations. You know, the classic story. The son who can never please the demanding father." Detective Morgan continued her methodical questioning of the guests, piecing together a picture of what had happened. All the testimonies were consistent. No arguments before the wedding, no signs of impending tragedy, except for one detail. Several witnesses had noted a peculiar moment with David's phone. "Where's Ethan?" Morgan asked a young officer, his clipboard in hand, after 2 hours of questioning. "In the next room with the medics," the officer replied. "He's in shock." Morgan found Ethan sitting on a couch in the staff lounge, staring blankly ahead, his hands still covered in blood. A nurse was gently treating a scratch on his cheek, though he didn't seem to notice. Lily's veil lay on a table nearby, a fragile symbol of a shattered dream. "Mr. Mitchell," Morgan began softly, taking a seat across from him, "I'm so sorry for your loss. I know this is unbearably hard, but I need to ask you a few questions to help understand what happened." Ethan slowly raised his head. There were no tears in his eyes, only a hollow emptiness. His lips, usually curved into a slight smile, now appeared stiff and motionless. "Did your father have any reason to disapprove of your marriage?" Morgan asked, trying to keep her voice delicate. "Perhaps there was some disagreement we should know about?" Ethan furrowed his brow slowly, as if the question required an immense effort to process. "He gave us his blessing," he finally responded, his voice low. "Paid for the wedding. Everything was fine. He gave Lily a family brooch for the engagement. Said she was worthy of becoming a Mitchell. Have you noticed any changes in his behavior lately?" Morgan pressed. "Maybe he's become more—" Ethan squeezed the veil in his hands, his fingers leaving reddish imprints on the once pristine white fabric. The weight of the moment pressed down on him. He had always been meticulous, controlling every detail of the wedding, but that was just his way. The message was clear, though. His father had gotten it loud and clear. Morgan didn't finish her thought, sensing the continuing would only make Ethan relive the horror of the gunshot. She gave him a moment of silence to process. "I don't know," Ethan finally replied, his voice barely above a whisper. His eyes stared ahead, unfocused. "I don't understand. Why did he do it? Why Lily? What did she do to him? Morgan gently placed her hand on his shoulder, feeling it tense beneath the fabric of his ruined tuxedo. We'll find out, she assured him softly. I promise, your father will be held accountable for his actions. She's been my whole life, Ethan said, his voice so quiet that Morgan had to lean in to catch every word. 2 years of absolute happiness. His sentence trailed off as he sank into silence, clutching the veil tightly, staring into nothing. The weight of his loss was evident in the way he sat, lifeless, consumed by grief. Morgan recognized that no words could comfort him now. She left her business card next to him, signaling to the nurse to stay close, and quietly stepped out of the room. Meanwhile, at the police station, David Mitchell sat calmly in the interrogation room, a featureless space with gray walls and a metal table. The CCTV camera in the corner watched his every move as he sat with arms folded, as though he were in a business meeting. Detective Ray Johnson, an older African-American man with a streak of gray in his hair, began the questioning. I'm not going to discuss it, David said flatly, his voice unwavering. You realize you've been seen by dozens of witnesses. Detective Johnson's voice was blunt. There's no point in denying it. David remained unfazed. I don't deny it, he replied, his voice level and composed. I killed her. That's a fact. I'm not going to waste your time denying the obvious. Johnson raised an eyebrow. Why? What made a respected businessman, a pillar of society, shoot his own son's fiancée on her wedding day? David's expression remained unchanged. I will not discuss it, he repeated, squaring his shoulders. My reasons are mine. But your son just lost his wife, Mr. Mitchell, Johnson pressed, on his wedding day, at the hands of his own father. Don't you think he deserves an explanation? A shadow of emotion crossed David's face, but quickly disappeared. Ethan will understand in time, he replied, his voice flat. Detective Morgan returned to the station later that afternoon, when the sun had set, casting the interrogation room windows in darkness. After reviewing the footage of David's interview, she decided to shift her approach. She knew the direct methods weren't working, so she would try something more subtle, more persuasive. Mr. Mitchell, she began, entering the room and closing the door behind her. We checked your phone, the very message you received before you pulled out your gun. For the first time that evening, David looked worried. His gaze sharpened, and his fingers, which had been resting on the table in a relaxed manner, twitched slightly. You don't have a warrant. My phone is private property, David said quickly, defensive. You're right, Morgan replied smoothly. But we have witness statements about a message you received just before the murder. A message that caused you to pull out a gun and shoot your son's fiancée. It's key evidence, and the judge will sign the warrant before dawn. David remained silent, but his fingers clenched slightly, betraying the tension in his body. What was in that message, Mr. Mitchell? Morgan asked softly, leaning forward. What could have been so horrible that it caused you to ruin your own son's life? I will not discuss it, he repeated, but this time his voice lacked the same firm conviction as before. Morgan's tone shifted, now more analytical. Your wife told us about your obsession with your family tree, about how important the continuation of the Mitchell family is to you. David's shoulders stiffened. For a split second, his eyes darted away, as if searching for some kind of support, though none was available. Emily doesn't know anything, he said, his voice tired now. She never understood. After several more hours of fruitless attempts, Morgan decided to take a break. The interrogation had gone as far as it could for now. She knew there was still much more to uncover, but she also knew that David was not ready to give anything up yet. She walked out of the room, leaving David to his thoughts, while she prepared for the next round of questioning. It was clear to her now, this case was far from simple, and David Mitchell had more to hide than anyone realized. A search warrant was issued for Mitchell's home and office, and Detective Morgan made her way to his mansion on the outskirts of town. The 3-story Georgian-style house stood proudly, surrounded by pristine gardens and a wrought iron fence adorned with a monogrammed X at the gate. The grand house with its white columns reflected the wealth and influence of one of Oak Ridge's most powerful families. Inside, Emily Mitchell welcomed the detective into the living room, where the honeymoon gifts still lay scattered around. Boxes wrapped in holiday paper and envelopes with cards, now left unread, added to the scene of a once celebratory occasion that was now overshadowed by tragedy. "I don't understand," Emily murmured, clutching a handkerchief tightly in her hands. "David, he was never a cruel man. Demanding, yes. Sometimes ruthless in business, but never like this." "Mrs. Mitchell," Morgan interrupted, her voice gentle but firm. "Your husband received a message before he did it. Do you have any idea who it might have been from?" Emily shook her head, her face tightening as the light from the floor lamp highlighted the gray strands in her neatly styled hair. "David works hard. He has hundreds of business contacts. He never discussed work matters with me." Then, how did he feel about Lily? Morgan's question cut through the silence. Emily hesitated, rubbing the pearl necklace around her neck. "Honestly," she said uncertainly, "it seemed like he was glad Ethan had finally decided to settle down. Ethan is 29, and David, he always talked about the importance of family. The continuation of the Mitchell family." Emily's voice trailed off. "Maybe he talked about it too much, especially after it became clear that we couldn't have more children." Morgan was listening intently, piecing the puzzle together. There were layers of tension, control, and unspoken expectations within this family. A domineering husband, a son desperate to please, and a quiet wife trying to exist in the shadow of them both. As the officers continued to methodically search the house, Morgan's conversation with Emily unfolded further. A few minutes later, an officer's voice broke the silence. "Detective, you might want to take a look at this," he called from David's office on the second floor. "We found something interesting in the drawer of the desk." Morgan walked into the office, her mind racing. The officer had found a folder tucked under a stack of business papers on a massive oak desk. The folder was clearly labeled LP, Lily Williams's initials. Morgan opened it, and the chill that ran down her spine was instant. Inside were surveillance photos, personal documents, and a full dossier on Ethan's fiancée. The first page of the file carried the logo of Southern Investigations, a private detective agency, with the words "Confidential Report for JH." "He's been following her," Morgan muttered under her breath, flipping through the pages. But why? What was he looking for? The next morning, the sky was overcast, as if the very air itself was mourning the events of the previous day. Morgan stood before Lily Williams's unremarkable two-story apartment on the outskirts of Oak Ridge. The events from the day before felt like a nightmare, but the folder with the Southern Investigations logo, now resting in her briefcase, was a painful reminder of the reality she had to face. Turning to Ethan Mitchell, who stood nearby, his eyes red from a sleepless night, Morgan asked softly, "Are you sure you want to be here?" Ethan's face was frozen in disbelief, his eyes still haunted by the tragedy of it all. "I must," he replied quietly. "Whatever the police have found, I need to know the truth." Morgan nodded, acknowledging his pain, and turned the key in the lock, the spare key they had found in Lily's purse. The door creaked open, and they stepped into the small but cozy apartment. Everything in the apartment spoke of Lily's life. Her pictures on the walls, books neatly arranged on the shelves, and fresh flowers in a vase on the kitchen table. Yet, all of it was frozen, a life interrupted before its time. "I've never been here before," Ethan said, his voice distant as he ran his hand along the bookshelf. "We always met at my place or in public places." Lily said her apartment was too small and uncomfortable. Morgan watched him closely, noticing the subtle shift in his demeanor. "She never invited you to her place in the 2 years you were together?" she asked carefully. Ethan looked at a picture of him and Lily against the backdrop of the ocean. His expression grew thoughtful, then clouded with regret. "No," he replied. "I never insisted. I thought she had a right to her personal space. I realize now how little I knew about her." The quiet truth of his words hung in the air, and Morgan knew that this discovery was only the beginning. The picture of Lily that Ethan had built was now crumbling, and as the investigation continued, so too would the revelations of hidden secrets within the Mitchell family. The detective methodically conducted a search of the apartment, with two uniformed officers assisting her. They carefully sifted through Lily's belongings, photographing and documenting everything they found. The living room, bedroom, and bathroom contained only the usual clothes, cosmetics, and personal items one would expect from any 24-year-old woman. "Check the bookshelves," Morgan ordered, aware that people often use books as hiding places. "And don't forget to check the mattress. There may be secret pockets inside." Ethan stood in the middle of the living room, his expression a mixture of confusion and disbelief. "I don't understand. What do you hope to find here?" Morgan paused, weighing how much she should reveal. "At your father's house, we found a file of private investigation reports on Lily. He's been following her." Ethan's face twisted with a mixture of anger and pain. "Why Lily? She was perfect, smart, caring, beautiful. My father told me himself that I made the right choice." "We're trying to find out," Morgan replied softly, watching one of the officers as he tapped the walls, searching for hidden compartments. "Detective, there's something in here," a young officer called out from the bedroom. He pointed to a small safe, tucked away at the back of a closet behind a stack of sweaters. "Did you know about this safe?" Morgan asked, turning to Ethan. The man shook his head, stepping closer. "No, I've never seen it before." "We'll need a warrant to open it," the officer began, but Ethan had already knelt in front of the safe, his fingers hovering over the digital keypad. "Try the day we met," he murmured, and entered the combination, 0309-222. The safe didn't open. "Maybe your birthday," Morgan suggested. Ethan hesitated, then entered a new combination, 21501. The lock clicked, and the safe door swung open. Inside was a stack of documents, a few photographs, and a small jewelry box. Ethan reached for the papers, but Morgan gently intercepted his hand. "Let me go first," she said, slipping on latex gloves. She carefully pulled out the papers and began to sift through them. A birth certificate in the name of Leo Williams, dated May 21st, 2001. Medical records with a diagnosis of gender dysphoria. Name change papers. Prescriptions for hormone therapy. And surgeon's reports. Morgan slowly raised her gaze to Ethan, who stood frozen, his eyes wide with disbelief. "Ethan," she said cautiously, "did you know that Lily?" His voice trembled as he interrupted. "No, that's impossible. I would have known. I would have felt." "Have a seat," Morgan said, pointing to the bed. "This is complex information." Ethan lowered himself to the edge of the bed, still staring at the documents in Morgan's hands. "Show me," he demanded, his voice quiet, shaking. Morgan handed him the birth certificate. Ethan stared at it for a long moment before his gaze shifted to the photographs she had taken from a safe. One of them showed a teenager, facial features vaguely resembling Lily's, but with short hair and wearing men's clothes. "I don't understand," he whispered. "We've been together for 2 years. We were close. How could I not know?" "Modern medicine works wonders," Morgan replied softly, "especially when the surgeries are performed by qualified professionals. And judging by these documents, Lily went to the best doctors." Ethan sat there, staring at the papers, trying to grasp the new reality in front of him. "So Dad found out," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. That's why he did it." Morgan nodded but replied, "That doesn't explain why he decided to do something so drastic. Many families face similar situations and find a way to accept the truth." The officers continued to search the apartment, but Morgan already knew they had found something crucial. She gave Ethan a few moments to process the new information before gently taking the documents away. "We'll need to take these as evidence," she said, "but I'll make copies for you if you'd like." Ethan nodded, his gaze distant. "She should have told me. I would have understood." "Are you sure?" Morgan asked quietly. Ethan remained silent, his mind swirling as he tried to come to terms with everything he had just learned. The woman he had loved, the woman he had married, was someone he hadn't truly known. And his father, the man who had tried to destroy their future together, had been the one to unearth this truth. As the weight of the discovery settled in, Morgan knew that for Ethan, nothing would ever be the same again. Ethan glared at her, a spark of anger flashing in his eyes. "Do you think I'm like my father?" he demanded, his voice tight with emotion. "I loved her. I married her. What does her past matter? It matters to some people, Morgan replied carefully. Perhaps Lily was afraid of your reaction, or your family's reaction. Ethan's voice turned bitter. She was right about my father, but not about me. After leaving Lily's apartment, Morgan sent the officers with the evidence to the station and drove to meet Emily Mitchell. She still had questions from their brief conversation the night before. Now that she knew the truth about Lily, Morgan hoped to gain a fuller understanding of the situation. Emily met her at the same house, but looked even more haggard than the day before. Her graying hair was hastily gathered into a bun, and her eyes were red from crying. "Did you find anything?" Emily asked, ushering Morgan into the living room. "Yes," Morgan replied, taking a seat. "But before I tell you, I need to ask you some questions about your husband." Emily nodded nervously, smoothing out the creases in her dress. "Of course. Yesterday, you mentioned his obsession with the continuation of the bloodline. Tell me more about that," Morgan asked, her tone gentle. Emily sighed deeply, as if preparing herself for an uncomfortable conversation. David has always been obsessed with the idea of a dynasty. His father was the same. For them, the Mitchell surname isn't just a name. It's a legacy that must continue. After Ethan was born, we had complications. I couldn't have any more children. "How did your husband react?" Morgan asked. "He was disappointed." "Very," Emily said, her gaze dropping to the floor. "But in time, he accepted it and shifted all his hopes to Ethan. He began to insist that Ethan marry early and have a large family. Not just children, but sons who would carry on the family name." "And Ethan?" Morgan prodded. "He resisted," Emily replied. "He was a good son, tried to live up to his father's expectations in everything. But when it came to his personal life, he wanted to find true love, not just a suitable candidate to produce heirs." Morgan jotted down some notes. "Did David interfere with Ethan's relationships with women?" Emily hesitated before nodding. "Yes, he did. He checked up on them." "In what ways?" Morgan asked. "He hired people to look into their backgrounds, their financial situations, their family histories," Emily explained. "And in recent years," she faltered. "Please continue," Morgan urged. "He insisted that Ethan's girlfriends undergo medical examinations, claiming it was to detect genetic diseases that could be passed on to their children. But in reality, he was testing their fertility." Morgan nodded knowingly. "Yes," she said softly. "That must have been humiliating." "Yes," Emily agreed quietly. "Several of Ethan's relationships ended because of it. The girls couldn't handle that kind of pressure." "And Lily?" Morgan asked. "Did she undergo the same scrutiny?" "No." Emily shook her head. "Ethan refused. It was the first time he openly went against his father's wishes. He said he loved Lily and would marry her, with or without medical clearance." "How did David react?" Morgan asked. "Strangely," Emily said, her brow furrowing as she recalled the moment. "He didn't make a scene like I expected. He just kind of withdrew, became brooding. Then, suddenly, he gave his blessing for the marriage. I was surprised, but happy for Ethan." "When did this happen?" Morgan inquired. "About 3 months ago," Emily replied. "Ethan brought Lily to a family dinner and announced the engagement. David was tense at first, but then he raised a toast to his future daughter-in-law and gave her the Mitchell family brooch." Morgan nodded, piecing together the information. "And after that, did you notice anything unusual in your husband's behavior?" "He started staying late at work more often," Emily said slowly. "Sometimes I'd hear him talking to someone on the phone late at night, locked in his office. But I thought it had to do with business." Emily fell silent, as though an idea had suddenly dawned on her. "He hired someone to follow her, didn't he?" she whispered. Morgan confirmed. "We found a folder of reports in his office." "Oh my God," Emily gasped, covering her mouth with her hand. "And what did he find?" Morgan took a deep breath. "Mrs. Mitchell, what I'm about to say may be shocking, but it's important to understanding your husband's motives." Emily straightened, preparing herself. "Speak," she said, her voice tense. "Lily was a transgender woman," Morgan said softly. Emily went pale, her hand rising involuntarily to her throat. "What?" she whispered. "How can this be?" "We have medical documentation to prove it," Morgan replied softly, watching Emily's reaction closely. Apparently, a private investigator uncovered the same information, and David. Emily stumbled over her words, unable to utter the obvious. We believe he received the final confirmation right at the wedding, that message on his phone. Emily's face crumpled in disbelief as she covered it with her hands. He couldn't bear the thought of his only son marrying a man, someone who could never give him grandchildren, his precious Mitchell heirs. Morgan's expression hardened. That doesn't justify murder. Emily quickly agreed, her voice trembling. Of course not, but I know my husband. For him, the continuation of the family line is everything. When he found out I couldn't have any more children, he didn't speak to me for a week. And when he finally accepted it, it was only because we already had Ethan. Morgan scribbled more notes in her notebook, her mind piecing together the tragic scenario. Did you know about the gun? Emily shook her head. David never kept a gun in the house. At least, that's what I thought. Morgan made a few more marks in her notebook. Where is Ethan now? I don't know, Emily whispered, her voice cracking. He didn't come home after what happened. He won't answer his cell phone. I'm afraid for him. We'll find him, Morgan assured her, rising from her seat. Thank you for your time, Mrs. Mitchell. If you think of anything else, please don't hesitate to call. As she left the Mitchell estate, Morgan got into her car and sat quietly for a moment, reflecting on the conversation. The pieces were coming together, but the situation was no less heartbreaking. A man so obsessed with procreation that he would murder his son's fiancée just to prevent him from marrying a woman who couldn't bear biological children. It was a tragedy that hit her like a punch to the gut. Her thoughts were interrupted by the ringing of her phone. Detective Morgan, she answered. This is Officer Johnson. We checked with Southern Investigations. They were hired by David Mitchell 3 months ago to investigate Lily Williams's past. What did they report to him? Morgan asked, her pulse quickening. The initial reports were vague. They found that Lily had moved to Oak Ridge from out of state and changed her name, but the reasons were unclear. Mitchell insisted on continuing the investigation, offering more money, and that's when they found the truth. Morgan let out a soft breath. Yes, the final report came in yesterday, along with Lily's medical records. That was right around the time of the wedding. Mitchell insisted the information was urgent. Thanks, Johnson, Morgan said. Keep looking for Ethan Mitchell. He's in shock and could be unpredictable. As she ended the call, she started the car. Her thoughts were consumed with Ethan. His world had shattered in the worst way possible. Not only had he just lost his wife, but he had also discovered the truth about her past and his father's role in her death. Just as she was about to pull out of the driveway, her phone rang again. She glanced at the screen, an unfamiliar number flashing. Detective Morgan, she answered. This is Ethan Mitchell. The voice on the other end was cold and determined. I want to talk to my father alone. The interrogation room at the Oak Ridge police station looked unchanged from the previous days. The gray walls, the metal table, and the dim lighting all remained the same. But for Morgan, the atmosphere had shifted. Now, she felt the confidence of someone who had pieced together the puzzle. She placed a folder with the Southern Investigations logo on the table in front of David Mitchell. Lily's medical records and a printout of her phone records were carefully laid out beside it. Across from her, David sat as still and composed as ever, despite 2 days in a holding cell. Only the shadows under his eyes betrayed his weariness. Good morning, Mr. Mitchell, Morgan said calmly as she lowered herself into the chair across from him. Today, we're going to talk about motives. David didn't respond, but Morgan saw a slight tilt of his head, a shift in his posture. I know why you killed Lily, she continued, opening the folder. And I know that the message you received during the wedding dance was the final report from the detective agency. She unfolded the phone log and pointed to the timestamp, 16:12, the exact moment that everything changed. David's expression faltered for the briefest moment, but he quickly regained his composure. Who was it? Morgan asked, leaning forward slightly. What made you pull the trigger? David Mitchell remained silent, his cold eyes betraying nothing as the weight of his actions hung heavily in the air. Ethan and Lily had just begun their first dance as husband and wife when Detective Morgan spoke, her voice breaking the moment. This number belongs to Howard Mitchell, The private investigator you hired to follow your son's fiancée. He sent you the final confirmation of what you already suspected. Lily Williams was born a man. For the first time since his arrest, David's face revealed an emotion, something between exhaustion and a bitter relief. He lowered his gaze, then murmured, "I won't discuss it," but his voice lacked the same unshakable confidence it had once held. "It doesn't matter anymore." Morgan shook her head, unfazed. "We have all the evidence," she said calmly. "We know about your obsession with procreation, the way you forced your son's girlfriends to undergo medical fertility tests. We know that Ethan first resisted, refusing to subject Lily to that humiliating procedure. And instead of respecting his decision, you hired a detective to dig into your son's fiancée's past." David sat still, his expression stony, but his fingers twitched nervously. Morgan continued, "A confession could mitigate your sentence. The prosecutor could take into account temporary impairment of judgment. Otherwise, you face life in prison without parole." "You don't understand," David finally said, his voice muffled as if he was speaking more to himself than to her. "No one understands. This isn't just a whim. It's a duty." Morgan raised an eyebrow, her gaze unwavering. "A duty to kill innocent people? To protect the Mitchell bloodline," David answered sharply. He straightened up, as if something inside him had snapped, allowing the words to tumble out. 20 generations. Do you understand? 20 generations of pure blood that built this city, this county, and it was all supposed to end in deception." Morgan's expression remained calm. "Lily didn't deceive anyone. She just wanted to live her life. She tricked my son." David's voice rose for the first time, his anger flaring. "Made him believe she could carry on our line. That she," he faltered, struggling to find the right words, "that she could bear him children." Morgan finished for him, speaking with quiet clarity. "Yes." David exhaled sharply, his gaze dropping. "Ethan is the only hope, the last Mitchell. My father told me. His father told him. The family name must live on. The blood must flow." His hands clenched into fists. "It's not just about children. It's about legacy. And for that legacy," Morgan said, her voice hardening, "you were willing to kill?" David lowered his gaze to his hands, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his words. "When I got that message, confirmation that she could never bear Ethan children, I realized there was no other choice. It was too late to explain anything. They were already married. You could have let them adopt," Morgan remarked, her voice still steady. David looked at her, genuinely confused. "Adopt? No. The Mitchell line would not continue with someone else's blood." Morgan shook her head, her amazement clear. "You're saying absurd things." Ethan stood still outside the interrogation room, pale and drained but determined. He met Morgan's gaze as she approached. "I recorded your conversation with your father," she said softly. "His confession. He explains his motives. Are you sure you want to hear it from him?" Ethan nodded solemnly, his voice a whisper. "I must look him in the eye." Morgan nodded and opened the door. "I'll be watching through the glass. If you can't handle it, just walk out." Inside, David looked up as Ethan entered. His face flickered with a range of emotions: hope, fear, love, guilt. "Ethan," he said, his voice cracking. Ethan's response was cold, distant. "Father." Detective Morgan watched from the observation room, her eyes glued to the conversation unfolding in front of her. David's expression was unreadable as he leaned forward slightly. "Are you ready to explain why you killed my wife?" Ethan asked, his voice strained with tension. David grimaced at the word wife, but he nodded, his shoulders stiff. "I wanted to protect you. To protect our family." "From what?" Ethan pitched forward, his voice rising with frustration. "From who?" David paused, his voice quiet but firm as he answered. "From the woman I loved. The one who made me happy." "She wasn't a woman," David said, his words dripping with finality. Ethan froze, his chest tight with disbelief. "What are you saying? You killed her because she wasn't a woman?" David stared at his son, an unspoken answer hanging between them. His own belief in the purity of bloodlines had shaped everything he had done, and now, in this moment, it was too late to undo it all. The damage had already been done. Ethan's heart ached as he realized the depth of his father's obsession. You wanted to preserve our bloodline, didn't you? The future of the family, the legacy, Ethan said, his bitter smile forming as he looked at his father. David, unwavering, straightened. 20 generations of Mitchell, a pure bloodline, he replied. I know that speech by heart. Ethan cut him off, his voice edged with frustration. I've heard all my life, but only now do I see how twisted it really is. Meanwhile, in her bedroom, Emily Mitchell sat alone, sifting through old photographs. One in particular caught her eye, a young David cradling the newborn Ethan in his arms. His face beamed with delight and pride, the look of a father deeply in love with his son. She ran her finger across the photograph, whispering softly to herself, "He really loved you." But her reverie was broken by the ringing of the doorbell. A young police officer stood at the threshold, and Emily's heart sank when he spoke. "Mrs. Mitchell, Detective Morgan sent me. She asked if you could help us with your husband's journals, the ones you mentioned during our conversation." Emily frowned. "Journals? I never mentioned any journals," she replied, puzzled. "She said your husband might have kept notes about candidates for your son," the officer explained. Emily nodded slowly, now understanding. "Not journals," she corrected. David never kept journals, but he was always methodical. He kept charts, lists, things like that. She led the officer to her husband's office, where the police had already searched, but evidently, they hadn't noticed the inconspicuous folder tucked away on the bookcase. It was labeled simply, "Personal." She pulled it out and handed it to the officer. "I've never looked inside." David wouldn't approve, she admitted. The officer opened the folder and whistled in surprise. Inside were spreadsheets neatly organized with the names of every woman Ethan had ever dated, their ages, physical characteristics, family history, and, most disturbingly, an assessment of their reproductive potential. "It's some kind of eugenic project," the officer muttered, flipping through the pages. Emily nodded, her voice heavy. "He's always been obsessed with the ideal. At first, I thought it was just high standards. Then, I thought it was just an oddity. But now I see it was madness." She sank into her husband's chair, overwhelmed by the weight of years lived under the shadow of his obsession. "After Ethan was born, I had complications. The doctor said I couldn't have any more children. That's when David changed. It was like a part of him died. He became cold, distant. He started talking about Ethan, not as a son, but as a means of continuing the family line. His whole world revolved around the idea of raising the perfect heir, an heir who would carry on the legacy, and then produce more Mitchells." The officer shifted uneasily, unsure of how to respond to her words. "I'll take this to Detective Morgan," he said finally. "Maybe it'll help." Emily nodded, though her heart felt heavy. "I hope it helps him understand. Helps Ethan understand," she said quietly. Meanwhile, in the interrogation room, the conversation between father and son was reaching its breaking point. "Did you know that Lily loved children?" Ethan asked, locking eyes with his father. "She worked at the library, led children's reading sessions every Saturday. The kids adored her. She would have made a wonderful mother." "Not a mother, an adoptive parent," David retorted stubbornly. "It's not the same thing." "It's the same thing to me," Ethan said firmly. "You know, I realized something after Lily died. The real legacy isn't in DNA or family names. It's in the love we give and the lives we touch." David just stared at him, the expression on his face one of confusion, like he was hearing a foreign language. "I'm still going to be a father," Ethan continued. "I'll adopt a child, maybe even several. They'll carry our name. They'll be just as much a Mitchell as you or me." "That's impossible," David replied, shaking his head. "Blood is everything. To hell with blood." Ethan slammed his fist on the table, the pain in his voice clear. "You killed a man because of your obsession with purity of blood. A man I loved. You ruined my life for some sick idea of legacy." "I was protecting our heritage," David said stubbornly, as if clinging to the past. "Someday, you'll understand." Ethan stood up, his face contorted with a mixture of anger and pain. "I will never understand," he said, his voice hard. "And I will never forgive you. You're no longer my father. And I swear, I will raise my children with completely different values: love, acceptance, respect. The words hung heavy in the air, a father and son locked in an impossible divide, the legacy of a family torn apart by the very thing that had once united them. Ethan paused in the doorway, his father's desperate words echoing in his mind. You can't give up your blood, Ethan. You are Mitchell. It's in your veins. But Ethan refused to let his father's obsession control him. Without turning around, he responded, Perhaps, but it's up to me to decide what that means. Detective Morgan, who had witnessed the conversation through the one-way mirror, stepped forward to meet Ethan in the hallway. She watched his face carefully, concerned. Are you all right? She asked. No, he answered honestly, his voice carrying the weight of his turmoil. And I don't think I ever will be. But I know what I have to do next. Just then, an officer approached with a folder, handing it to Detective Morgan. You might want to take a look at this, he said. Morgan opened the folder, her expression hardening as she flipped through the documents. He systematized information on all your relationships, Ethan. He even assessed their reproductive potential, calculated the likelihood of conceiving sons. Ethan stood strangely calm, unaffected by the revelation. It doesn't surprise me anymore. I've lived next to this madness all my life. But I never noticed how deep it went. 3 months later, the courtroom was packed. David Mitchell's trial had become a spectacle, drawing not just local but national attention. The shocking story of a millionaire who murdered his son's fiancée because of her transgender identity and his obsession with procreation had captured the public's imagination. David sat at the defense table, impeccably dressed but visibly aged, his face drained of emotion. Beside him, a high-priced lawyer specialized in handling murder cases. Ethan, seated in the front row, sat beside his mother, Emily, who looked frail but determined. Since David's arrest, she had filed for divorce and sought therapy to deal with years of emotional abuse. When the judge read the verdict, life in prison without parole, David showed no emotion. He turned to look at his son one last time, but Ethan was already standing, walking away. I did everything for you, for our family, David muttered, as the guards prepared to escort him out. Ethan paused, but didn't turn around. No, Father, he said quietly. Everything you've done for the sake of your obsession. My family is just beginning. Detective Morgan observed the scene from the back of the courtroom. The trial was over, and justice had been served, at least in part. But as it often was with cases like this, it didn't feel satisfying. Too many lives had been ruined. 2 weeks after the trial, Morgan received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a picture of Ethan holding a little girl with Asian features and a short note that read, Meet Lily Mitchell, my daughter. A new chapter begins. Morgan smiled as she looked at the picture. There was a light in Ethan's eyes, a glow of life despite everything he had been through. Perhaps, she thought, the real legacy isn't in blood, but in the love we choose to give. Meanwhile, 300 miles away in a maximum security prison, David Mitchell sat alone in his cell, staring at a blank wall. The voices of his ancestors still echoed in his mind, reminding him of the importance of blood, of duty to the family name, and of 20 generations of pure lineage. But in rare moments of clarity, another voice would break through, the voice of his own, remembering little Ethan, his first steps, his laughter. And in those moments, David wondered if he had paid too high a price for his obsession. Had he sacrificed what really mattered for the phantom idea of a legacy? But those moments of reflection were fleeting. As the judge had said during the trial, some beliefs are so deeply ingrained that they become a prison before a person even gets behind bars. Back in Oak Ridge, life moved on. The Mitchell construction empire, once a symbol of David's legacy, was now headed by Emily, who had shown unexpected business acumen. Ethan had returned to work as an architect, though now he focused on designing children's institutions, a far cry from his father's empire. And in his home, little Lily, a girl with different blood, but the same last name, grew up. She was living proof that a true family is not defined by genetics, but by love. Detective Alexa Morgan occasionally crossed paths with them in the city, seeing father and daughter walking in the park or picking out books at the same library where the first Lily had once worked. Each time, she thought about how this new family had been built not on the foundation of blood, but on something far more enduring: love. Fate often leads people down unexpected paths, revealing the destructive force of obsession and the incredible resilience of the human heart to heal and rebuild. The Mitchell story didn't end with happiness. Too much pain, too much loss. Yet, there was a new beginning, and perhaps that's all we can hope for after tragedy: the opportunity to write the next chapter with a different, brighter perspective.